Okay, so parallel lines. Firstly, you can see lots on the page, but if I quickly show the symbol for parallel lines, that symbol is now showing that those two are the parallel lines. And remember, parallel lines are lines that are never meet. They're like train tracks. Now, from the picture, you can see that there's a line then cutting through those parallel lines, and there are lots of properties of parallel lines. So, a technique that we use is tracing paper, but you're going to have to imagine it and remember it from lesson. If I trace around that angle with tracing paper, I could then slide that around and just see where else that angle would fit. And if you look at the angle, you can see that it is an obtuse angle. So have a look around where else is an obtuse angle. So if I imagine that tracing paper and I slid it down, that would fit exactly into that position there. So then we've got two angles that are the same. So if I knew in the exam question that was 110, then that would also be 110. Likewise again, if I look around, I could then try and see where else the tracing paper would fit. The tracing paper would also fit there, which if that was 110 would make that 110. And likewise, if I slid it back up to the top, that would also be the same angle as well. Now, obviously in the exam it's nice to know which angles are the same as each other, but you also need to be able to give a reason. So for example, if the exam question looked like this, we've got the 110 and that there being A or another letter of the alphabet. Your first mark would be for just saying that A is the same as 110, so A equals 110. That's your first mark, but then your second mark would be for giving the reason. So the reason is because they are vertically opposite. You couldn't just say opposite in the exam, you wouldn't get the marks. And if it helps, you can draw a little picture in to say that they are vertically opposite each other. Now, they are not the only two that are vertically opposite each other. You can see from the other picture that they were vertically opposite each other down the bottom as well. But there are also other angles which rely on other angle facts that are also vertically opposite. So from previous videos, we should know angles on a straight line add up to 180 degrees. Therefore, I can work out this missing angle there. I know it adds up to 180, so I can do 180 minus 110 to work out that angle there of 70 degrees. Now, we've just said about being vertically opposite, so the smaller angle, the acute angle, has another one which is vertically opposite to that, which will also be the same as it, so also 70 degrees. Now, we also know we can check it because angles around a point, so all around that point there, should add up to 360. And if you check it, 110 plus 70, and then another 110 plus 70 gives you that full 360. So that's one of the reasons you could give in the exam. A second example then, if we were told in the exam that that angle is 115 degrees, you could be asked to work out that angle there. So let's call it X this time. Now, again, you could use the tracing paper in the exam. So if I had tracing paper, I could trace around that angle there and then see where else that fits. And if I was to slide that piece of tracing paper down, I would see that that angle would fit. However, the additional marks in the exam are for being able to name the reasons. So this particular one, when you trace around it and you don't swap sides, it's called corresponding angles. So the way I always identify it is if I use my tracing paper and I trace around the one angle and then I slide it down and it fits onto the next parallel line, that those two angles are corresponding. Now, some teachers will refer to this as a particular letter, which I'm going to show you on the second diagram as well. So you may be familiar with this. You may see an angle there and an angle there and think, yeah, I could do the tracing paper and that would work. Those two angles would be the same as each other. And you may have been told something about F angles. So you can see an F shape there and you've got the F angles there. So this is also the corresponding. Now obviously not every single one will look like an F, which is why I always think about it as the sliding tracing paper, because on that last example it was more like an upside down F. So it can get a little bit confusing if you're just relying on letters alone.
but it's up to you how you remember it. That's your corresponding angles. And the final one then, if we just have a look at, again, the two different techniques. The first thing you could do, again, is using the tracing paper. You could trace around one of the angles, let's say this angle, and let's say in the exam you were told that that angle was worth 40 degrees. You could be asked to work out this angle here, let's call it Y. Now, again, you can use a tracing paper technique. If you trace around that angle and then move the tracing paper around, you could see that that angle would be the acute one and it would fit into that piece there. Now, the reasons that you'd given the exam for this particular one would be alternate angles, and we'll talk through that now. So alternate angles would be your reason, but I'm going to show you the second method that you may have heard of in your lessons. So you could have heard of the Z angles. So if I just show it on the other diagram on the right hand side, if you see a Z, then those angles, so that one there is equal to that one there. A little bit harder to spot again. Let me undo that. You could have a backwards Z, so going across there this time. These two angles would be the same as each other, this angle there and that angle there. So again, on the other diagram, these two angles would be the same. Now I'm going to quickly talk you through GCSE questions as well. So there's your reasons: alternate angles and corresponding and vertically opposite. So you can play those back, rewind and have a look at them, but I'm just going to show you GCSE questions like this. So question A, you'd just be find the value of the x, and if I use tracing paper or F's, if that's 125 degrees, that's going to be 125 degrees. If I wanted the reason for this one, the tracing paper stayed on the same side, that's going to be corresponding. Next one, if we have a look at it, use tracing paper or use the Z's. 57 and X must be equal, so B is 57 degrees, and the reason for this one is alternate. Now with the tracing paper, the way that you can tell the difference between alternate and corresponding is that you would have to swap sides with the tracing paper. So if you were using the tracing paper on this side here, you wouldn't be sliding it down because that would give you this angle here, so you'd be then rotating it and it would give you that one there. So just be mindful, if you're swapping sides, you're alternating. And the final question, we're looking for X and we've got 70 degrees there. We can see that vertically opposite X is 70 degrees, and you'd give the reason vertically opposite.